Just as sure as the leaves are falling, along with the temperatures, winter sports will be here very, very soon. Gyms and rinks will be full of excited students and fans. However, there is one aspect of this scene that has changed through the recent years. School sports associations around the country are losing thousands of officials who referee events, no matter what the level or the sport. The National Federation of State High School Associations reported that more than 50,000 sports officials have left in the last 3 years alone. That means for every 10 officials that leave, only 4 are entering the profession. I'm sure you can guess what the major reason for this decline is. Behavioral issues with participants and fans, the primary reason. Many are hanging up their whistles because too many fans, particularly parents, believe they know the rules better than the officials do. It's a trend that is nationwide, and it's sad. As each school year starts, there are fewer men and women officials than we had the previous season. It's time to recognize the value of competitive sports and insist that fan behavior improve. A partial list of the bad things includes harassment, lack of respect, a thankless job, lack of support, and low pay. Across the country, the average sports official earns about $15 per hour if you count up all the time he or she has to put into it. So what do we do to solve the problem? Addressing the issue is multifaceted because there's no one thing that's going to turn things around. Those who govern sports and fans need to acknowledge the vital role that officials play and create a safer and more supportive environment for them. Better pay, no toleration for abuse, training programs, public awareness campaigns to foster respect for officials, the only way that we can attract talented individuals to become officials. Now, one way I think we can make progress is right in front of us. Very few players will ever make the pros, and a low percentage actually advance to college athletics. But young people who have played on teams most of their lives could be a huge pool of applicants after graduation. Here are some of the reasons why I think they can be a tremendous asset in the years to come. Players have in-depth knowledge of the game and can use their on-field understanding to each sport with all of the variables. Their experience as athletes lends credibility to what is required of officials. More than that, they have a passion for the sport that they themselves played. Sure, they'll need some training and some education, but offer a giant reserve of talent for the future. Officials, groups, and schools should be offering interested players an opportunity to take the next step. Volunteer classes for students in sports officiating could spur a desire to go into officiating, much like any other field or interest. The transition from player to referee would give us what the coming years certainly will demand. Much success in improving the current situation calls for everyone interested in sports to improve their own personal conduct at games and use yourself as an example to the young people who are watching you. This is George Hale, and that's my perspective on sports.